Be honest. You were about to settle. Not because you stopped believing, but because you were just too tired to keep hoping. And right when you were about to accept less, Allah froze your life. He stopped the conversation. He blocked the opportunity. He delayed what felt like the answer. But what if the freeze wasn't rejection, but rescue from a version of your future you would have regretted quietly? Forever? 1. Everything was starting to make sense. Then it all froze. You really thought this was it. After everything you went through, the heartbreaks that shattered your chest, the quiet nights you cried into your pillow without anyone knowing, the constant feeling of being behind in life while everyone else kept moving forward. You held on. You still made dua. You still showed up. You still chose to believe, even with shaking faith and a tired soul. And slowly, it started to feel like something was changing. You were finally catching your breath. Doors you thought were locked forever began to creak open. People started showing up in your life at the right time. Your heart, once filled with doubt, began to soften with hope. You began to dream again, not because life was perfect, but because it finally felt possible. You thought, this must be it. This must be the moment Allah turns everything around for me. Your mind started making plans. Your heart started imagining the next chapter. Even the air around you felt lighter. And then, without warning, everything stopped. Conversations that once flowed went dry. Doors that looked wide open slammed shut. People you trusted drifted away without a reason. Your efforts, once blessed with small wins, now felt like they were being swallowed in silence. Your whole life paused, not slowly, not softly, but like the moment right before dawn, when everything is quiet, but not peaceful, still, but not safe, alive, but not moving. You didn't understand it. You couldn't explain it. And worst of all, you couldn't fight it. Because how do you fight a freeze that feels like it came directly from heaven? So your heart asked a question it was scared to say out loud. Ya Allah, why? Why now? Why stop me when I was finally healing? Did I do something wrong again? Did you change your mind about me? You tried to reassure yourself. You tried to be patient. But the silence started to sound like rejection. And that broke you in a way nothing else ever had. Because this time, you weren't crying over what was taken. You were crying over what was almost given, what you almost touched, what you almost became. The dream was so close, and then it was gone. But listen carefully, not with your ears, but with your soul. Allah didn't change his mind about you. He didn't punish you. He didn't forget you. He protected you. He paused you because he saw something coming that you couldn't see. He knew something you couldn't know. And the freeze you felt wasn't a punishment. It was a veil of mercy. You see, there are moments in life when Allah gives you a taste of what's coming, not to tease you, but to train your heart to believe in it. He lets you see a glimpse of the dream, so you'll trust the direction. And then he hides it again, so you'll trust him. Because sometimes we think the test is over, just because things are starting to feel good again. But what if that good feeling was just the soft opening of something much bigger, something you weren't fully ready to carry yet? What if Allah was showing you a preview, so you'd keep walking, but then froze your steps? Not to harm you, but to prepare you for the version of the dream that won't collapse when life tests it again. You thought the freeze was the end, but in reality, It was the beginning of something deeper, something sacred. Allah wasn't silent because he left. He was silent because he was working on things you never saw, in places you never imagined, inside you and beyond you. Because sometimes, before Allah gives you the blessing, He has to make sure the blessing won't break you. So He slows you down. He quiets your world. He pulls you into stillness to remove what can't come with you into your next season, the hidden doubts, the silent insecurities, the people who only clapped for you when you were blooming, but not when you were buried. He paused your movement so He could grow your roots deeper. So, when He brings the blessing again, it won't be temporary. It won't depend on anyone, and it won't fall apart under pressure, because what you're being prepared for is not a moment. It's a mission, and that kind of bloom can't be rushed. So, no, this freeze wasn't random. It was written, designed, perfected, and when the time comes, the very same moment that felt like a wall will be the moment that shows you why Allah pressed pause just as your life was about to bloom. And you'll realize the pause wasn't to punish your progress. It was to preserve your purpose. 2. You were about to walk into something that would have broken you quietly. You were about to step into something that looked like a blessing, but behind its smile was something that would have broken you quietly. It wasn't evil on the outside. It wasn't clearly wrong. In fact, to you, it felt like the exact thing you were waiting for. It felt peaceful at first. It made you smile again. It felt like it healed something inside you. You even told yourself, maybe this is what Allah saved me for. But He didn't let it last, because what you saw as comfort was actually distraction. What felt like home was really another detour in disguise. And Allah, in His unseen mercy, stepped in, not with a loud no, not with punishment, but with silence, with stillness, with delay. Because if He had let you walk into it, you would have stayed too long. You would have fallen too deeply. You would have accepted too little, because your heart was tired of waiting for more. And eventually, you would have broken, not with noise, but with quiet regret. The kind of breaking that doesn't scream, but slowly drowns your spirit. The kind of pain that comes not from a blow, but from the slow suffocation of staying somewhere your soul was never meant to settle. He froze your steps, because what you were about to enter was going to drain you without you even realizing it. It would have taken your energy, your peace, your identity, bit by bit. You would have started losing yourself while trying to hold on to something that wasn't real. But because you were attached to the feeling of relief, you would have called it a blessing. You would have defended it. You would have prayed to keep it, even while it quietly chipped away at the strength Allah helped you rebuild. And so, before you got too deep, before you gave your heart to something that would never protect it, before you bent your standards to fit a situation that wasn't sacred, Allah interrupted you. He let you taste it, just enough to wake up your hope. Then He removed it, before it buried your purpose. You didn't lose a blessing. You were saved from a slow spiritual death. And maybe you didn't see it. Maybe you're still grieving it. Because when something breaks loudly, you know it's broken. But when it breaks quietly, you start blaming yourself. You start wondering if you ruined it, if you weren't enough, if you misunderstood the signs. But the truth is, you were protected. Because Allah saw what you couldn't. He saw what they said behind closed doors. He saw the ending you were walking toward. He saw how you would have stayed longer than you should, just because it looked like the thing you asked for. And so He froze it. He let it vanish. He let it confuse you, because sometimes confusion is a mercy, when clarity would have convinced you to stay. You wanted a sign. You wanted confirmation. But instead, He gave you something better. A divine interruption. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel fair. But one day, you will thank Him for stopping what you didn't have the strength to walk away from, because what would have broken you quietly is now the very thing He used to build your spiritual sensitivity. You didn't fail. You were rescued. And when the real blessing comes, the one that doesn't confuse you, the one that brings you closer to Him, not just emotionally, but spiritually, you'll finally understand why Allah didn't let you walk into what was never going to protect your soul. What you called almost mine was just a test dressed like a dream. And Allah, in His perfect love, didn't let you love something that was never going to love you in return. 3. Your strength was still built on survival, not surrender. You were strong. No one could deny that. You kept going when everything in you said stop. You smiled through the tears. You helped others heal, while your own heart was still bleeding silently. People admired you. They said, "You're so resilient." They saw your strength and thought you were unshakable. But only you knew the truth. You weren't moving from peace. You were moving from pain. You didn't keep going because you were healed. You kept going because you didn't know what else to do. Because life had never given you the space to fall apart. You didn't grow through ease. You grew through fire. You didn't rise because you were ready. You rose because no one came to rescue you. Your strength became your identity. But deep down, that strength was born from survival, not surrender. And Allah knew that. He saw how your strength was still tangled with fear, how your drive came from trauma, how your faith, though beautiful, was still laced with the fear of being forgotten again. You were surviving life, but you weren't surrendered to it. You trusted Allah, yes, but it was a trust that shook every time things slowed down. Every time a delay happened, a piece of your heart panicked, because deep inside, you were still carrying the fear that everything would be taken again. So Allah, the most merciful, paused everything. He froze the momentum, because He didn't want your future to be built on a foundation made of pain. He didn't want you to rise higher, while still carrying the voice in your head that said, "You have to earn love. You have to be useful to be worthy. You have to stay strong, or everyone will leave again." He wanted to rebuild you from the inside out. He wanted your strength to come from stillness, not fear, from faith, not force, from peace, not panic. So He stopped your life, not to break you, but to break the belief that survival is strength, to break the illusion that healing means never being weak. He wanted to teach you a deeper truth, that surrender is not giving up, it's giving in to Him. You didn't need to prove anything anymore. You didn't need to be everything for everyone. You didn't need to run from one milestone to the next, just to feel like you mattered. So He froze your steps, to whisper a truth you had been too busy to hear. You are loved by me, even when you're not moving, even when you're not achieving, even when you're not holding it all together. He wanted you to rest, without guilt, to pause, without fear, to stop surviving long enough, to finally start surrendering. because survival will only take you so far. But surrender. That's where divine strength begins. So, if your life feels paused, if everything is still, if you feel like you're no longer strong like before, understand this. You're not falling apart. You're falling into alignment. The version of you Allah is building now won't just carry burdens. They will carry barakah. They won't just know how to endure life. They will know how to trust it. To trust Allah deeply without panic when things slow down. You didn't lose your strength. You're learning to stop borrowing it from fear. Because the next season of your life, the one you've been praying for, can't be carried by the strength that came from wounds. It needs to be carried by a strength that comes from worship, a strength that comes from knowing you no longer need to survive, when Allah is already writing every breath of your journey with love. 4. Your intention was pure, but your environment was poisoning it. Your heart was in the right place. You weren't chasing anything haram. You weren't asking for the dunya in a selfish way. You weren't trying to harm anyone. You just wanted peace. You wanted movement. You wanted to see your sincerity turn into something real. And you thought, if my intention is pure, then surely Allah will open the way. But the way didn't open. In fact, everything around you started to feel heavier, harder, colder, like no matter how much light you were carrying in your heart, it kept getting dimmed by something unseen. You kept asking yourself, why isn't anything working? Why do I feel like I'm giving so much but nothing's growing? And the answer, though quiet, was devastating when you finally faced it. It wasn't your intention, it was your environment. You see, sometimes your heart is clean, your prayers are sincere, your efforts are real, but the place you're in is polluting everything you're trying to build, not because it's obvious, but because it's subtle, because poison doesn't always come in loud, obvious forms. Sometimes it comes in the shape of convenience, of comfort, of old relationships that feel familiar but are quietly draining your energy, of people who don't stop you, but never truly support you either, people who say they love you, but can't stand the thought of you becoming someone they can't control, people who applaud your growth in public, but resent your light in private, people who invite you to stay small in the name of humility, who laugh when you dream big in the name of realism, who guilt-trip your distance when you try to focus on Allah in the name of you've changed. And slowly, without realizing it, you start shrinking, you start doubting, you start lowering the volume of your passion, editing the size of your dreams, and apologizing for wanting something greater. Until one day, your intention is still pure, but your soul is exhausted. Your vision is blurry. Your worship feels distracted, not because you lost your faith, but because your surrounding air is toxic, and you've been trying to bloom in poisoned soil. So Allah, in His mercy, froze your progress, not because you were wrong, but because the place was. Because no matter how pure a seed is, if it's planted in poisoned ground, it will either grow deformed or not grow at all. So He paused your path. Before you rooted yourself in a land that could never nourish your purpose. You saw the delay as a punishment, but it was actually a rescue, because had He let your dream bloom in that environment, it would have grown bent, tired, and constantly under attack. And eventually, you would have blamed yourself. You would have started asking, is it my heart? Is it my iman? Why can't I sustain anything good? But the truth is, Your heart was always good. It was the air around it that was suffocating its fire. So Allah, out of love, took you out of that place, or made it so uncomfortable that you had no choice but to detach. He made it feel like isolation, but it was actually purification. He made it feel like rejection, but it was actually redirection to cleaner air. Because what He's about to give you requires an environment that reflects your sincerity, not one that slowly poisons it. You don't need to beg to stay where your soul is suffocating. You don't need to feel guilty for outgrowing the places that were only meant to be transit stations, not homes. Sometimes Allah pauses your path because He knows the next step you take will plant you somewhere, and He refuses to let that be a place that can't protect the purity of your purpose. And maybe you didn't understand it before. Maybe you were too attached to what was around you. Maybe you called it loyalty. Maybe you called it history. But Allah saw that the future was too expensive to let it grow in poisoned ground. So He froze your steps to clear the space, to remove the whispers, to create an atmosphere that would feed your sincerity, not fight it. You didn't lose your light. You just needed to stand somewhere it could shine fully again. And when the new ground is ready, when your soul is no longer inhaling other people's projections, you'll realize the delay wasn't against your intention. It was for its protection. 5. He froze it because you started settling for a version of the dream that was too small. You didn't notice it at first. It was slow, quiet, unintentional. But little by little, you started settling. Not because you lost faith in Allah, but because you started losing faith in yourself. You told yourself, maybe I'm asking for too much. Maybe this level of love, of purpose, of peace, isn't meant for me. Maybe I should just be grateful with what's available. And so you started reshaping your dream, not to fit your soul, but to fit your fear, to fit the silence, to fit the rejections, to fit the time that kept passing without the answer you were waiting for. You stopped asking boldly. You stopped raising your hands with full belief. You still made dua, but your heart had lowered its expectations, not because you stopped believing in Allah's power, but because you started thinking, maybe that power isn't for me. So you began shrinking your vision to match what you could control, what you could see, what wouldn't hurt too much if it never came. You started preparing for disappointment before it even arrived. You started picking dreams that felt safer, not dreams that made your soul come alive. And that's when Allah stepped in, not with a punishment, not with anger, but with a pause, a freeze, because you were about to build a life around a dream too small for the person Allah was shaping you to be. He froze your steps because you started lowering the ceiling on a palace He was still building for you in silence. He saw how you were making room in your life for things you prayed to outgrow. He saw how you were about to say yes to something you once begged to be protected from. And He knew if He let it continue, you would have called it a blessing, but it would have become a burden, because deep down, you weren't settling from wisdom. You were settling from weariness. You were tired. Tired of trying. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping for something that always seemed just out of reach. And Allah saw that exhaustion. He saw how your delay was starting to rewrite your identity, how you began defining yourself by what hadn't arrived, instead of what was still being prepared. So He froze your life, to protect the size of the dream, to protect the purity of your vision, to remind you, I didn't bring you this far to give you halfway answers. You weren't created to live a small life. You weren't created to settle for almosts, maybes, or at leasts. You were created to carry something heavy with meaning, beautiful with divine timing, and surrounded by barakah that can't be faked. So when Allah saw your heart preparing to accept something good enough, He stopped you, because what you asked for is still on the way. But you started building a life around something that would have blocked it. So He emptied your hands. He silenced the noise. He removed the temporary, so you wouldn't miss the eternal. And yes, you felt frustrated. You felt stuck. You felt like things were finally moving, only to be paused again. But what you called a freeze was Allah refusing to let your soul settle in a space that couldn't hold its full light. You see, He loved you too much to let your tired heart make permanent decisions in a temporary valley. And He knew what you were about to accept would have made you feel secure for a season, but empty for a lifetime. So if it suddenly disappeared, if it broke, if it slipped away the moment you were ready to grab it, that wasn't failure. That was divine protection from smallness. Your dream wasn't wrong, but your view of yourself within that dream had become too small. So Allah pressed pause until you could remember the original version, the one you made when your heart was full of belief, before time and delay made you start bargaining with hope. Because what's coming isn't average, and it requires you to rise again, not just in action, but in vision, in courage, in certainty that Allah's delay is never a downgrade. It's always a divine upgrade you couldn't yet see. And when it finally arrives, you'll thank Him for not letting you settle for something your soul was never meant to shrink inside. 6. He needed you to see who was around you when you were no longer useful to them. You didn't see it when everything was moving, when your life was busy, when you had momentum, when you had something to give. They were around. They called. They smiled. They supported you. Or at least, it looked like support. They encouraged you, as long as your light didn't outshine their own. They stayed, as long as your rise didn't make them feel too small. But then Allah froze your life. He paused everything. Your progress, your blessings, your voice, your visibility. And with that silence came another silence. The people you thought would stay suddenly didn't. You reached out less, and they didn't check in. You offered nothing, and they lost interest. You no longer had something they could use, copy, borrow, or benefit from. And suddenly, your value disappeared. You sat alone in a room full of unanswered messages, and your heart asked a question it had always been too scared to ask. Did they ever love me? Or did they love what I could do for them? And Allah, in His divine love, didn't give you the answer with words. He gave it through silence, through absence, through a freeze that stripped away every connection, not rooted in sincerity. Because sometimes you need to be emptied to see who was only around to fill themselves. He let your life pause, so you could finally see what your eyes kept overlooking. When you were too busy surviving, pleasing, serving, hoping, because when you're constantly giving, people know how to love that version of you. But when you have nothing left to offer, that's when you find out who was truly connected to your soul and who was only attached to your benefit. You weren't useless. You were just no longer usable. And for some people, that made you invisible. It hurt. It confused you. You started asking, was I ever loved genuinely? Was our bond ever real? Or was I just a temporary stop on their way to something better? And that question, as painful as it is, was one Allah wanted you to ask. Because the rise He's preparing for you cannot be witnessed by those who would have claimed your growth, while secretly resenting it. He didn't delay your life to punish you. He delayed it to protect you from being surrounded by people who would have clapped for your blooming, only to poison the roots when you weren't looking. Sometimes the freeze isn't about your path. It's about your circle. He had to let things slow down so that masks could fall naturally, so you could observe a note from pain or revenge, but from clarity. Clarity that says, if I'm not shining and you leave, you were never meant to witness the light Allah is still preparing. And yes, you felt lonely, but you needed that loneliness, because Allah was training you to stop needing the presence of those who were only comfortable with the weaker version of you, the version that overgave, the version that apologized for shining, the version that was afraid to say no, the version that stayed small to make others feel big. So He froze everything to let you observe in stillness what you couldn't see in movement. He didn't just show you who left. He showed you who never truly stayed. He didn't just reveal the absence. He revealed the intention. And as much as it broke you, it freed you. Because the truth is, you were building your future around people who were never meant to see your final form. People who only knew how to love you when you were broken, who only offered loyalty when you were quiet, who only stayed when you were useful. But the version of you that's coming, the one Allah is shaping through this silence, won't need to beg for presence, won't need to overcompensate for love, won't need to shrink to make others stay. You will know who is with you because of your soul, not because of your season. So if your life has felt like it's been stuck, if people have walked away during your freeze, if silence has surrounded your soul in the loneliest way, know this: it wasn't abandonment, it was divine clarity. Because what's coming next in your life can't be shared with people who were only ever comfortable with the version of you Allah is asking you to leave behind. 7. Your identity was still attached to an old version of you. You wanted to rise. You wanted to move. You wanted the chapter to open. You even told yourself, I'm ready now. But something inside you was still standing in the past. Not physically, not in action, but in identity. You didn't realize it, but the version of you Allah was calling forward wasn't the version you were still showing up as. Because even though you were changing, your identity was still tied to the old story, the old name, the old scars, the old patterns of survival you learned when you didn't feel safe in the world. You were becoming someone new, but part of you was still clinging to the one who had to survive betrayal, who had to hide their feelings just to be loved, who had to stay small so others wouldn't feel threatened, who had to pretend they were okay just to keep peace. That version of you didn't come from Allah. It came from pain, from abandonment, from the way the world failed you. And somewhere along the way, you began to wear those wounds like an identity. You called it just how I am. You called it realistic. You called it mature. But what you really meant was, this is who I had to become to not be broken. And Allah saw it. He saw how your du'as were sincere, but your sense of self was still built on broken foundations. How you were praying for blessings that required a voice you were still scared to use. How you were asking for relationships while still believing you weren't worthy of being chosen. How you were asking for peace, but still walking like someone who expects the next thing to go wrong. And so he froze your life, not to punish you, not to humiliate you, but to reintroduce you to you, because what was coming next, it required someone who no longer responded to the world from their wounds. It required someone who no longer saw themselves as the person they were forced to become, when they didn't know healing was even possible. You see, sometimes we don't realize that we're trying to build a divine life while still thinking like a version of us that didn't believe in love, or trust, or hope, or softness. So Allah, out of pure mercy, pressed pause on your progress until the false identities could melt, until the trauma masks could fall, until you stopped identifying yourself by who left you and started identifying yourself by who stayed with you all along. Because as long as you were still holding on to the old narrative, I'm the one who always gets hurt, I'm the one who always gets replaced, I'm the one who never gets chosen first, you are going to subconsciously reject the very prayer you made, because it didn't match the identity you kept carrying. And Allah wanted to bless you in a way that didn't fight your current self, but fit your transformed self. So He delayed it, so you could finally outgrow the need to carry old names into new places, so you could stop bending who you are, to be more acceptable to people who never understood your soul, so you could stop apologizing for being the version of you that Allah was patiently waiting to emerge, because your delay wasn't about your effort, it was about your identity. The truth is, you were still dressing your future in clothes that belonged to your survival season, still thinking like the one who was broken, still praying like the one who didn't believe they deserved softness, still moving like the one who thought stability was something borrowed, not something you could actually live in. But the version of you that Allah is calling forward doesn't flinch when loved, doesn't hide when seen, doesn't run when peace finally feels real, and doesn't chase after what was never meant to stay. That version of you was buried underneath everything the old world told you to be, and so Allah had to freeze your movement until the mirror was clean enough for you to finally recognize the face He was trying to show you. Not the broken one, not the bitter one, not the abandoned one, but the chosen one, the one who isn't defined by the delay, but by the light it revealed. You were never forgotten. You were just becoming. And when that new you fully arrives, not through noise, but through truth, everything that was frozen will melt, not because time passed, but because you finally matched the version of you that the blessing was always written for. 8. He froze it because the version of you that will carry the blessing hasn't been born yet. You keep asking why it hasn't come yet, why the door is still closed, why the answer is still silent, why the dream you made so much dua for seems stuck behind an invisible wall. You look around and say, Ya Allah, I'm ready now. I've healed, I've tried, I've changed. Why haven't you opened the way? But maybe the delay isn't about the dream. Maybe it's about the carrier. Maybe the person you are right now, as sincere and as strong as you've become, still isn't the one who's meant to receive it. Not because you're not worthy, not because you haven't tried hard enough, but because the version of you that can truly protect the blessing, hold it without losing faith, carry it with humility and vision, hasn't fully been born yet. And Allah, in His mercy, refuses to let the blessing land in the hands of someone who's still halfway becoming. Because the thing you're praying for isn't small. It's not just a moment. It's a divine trust. It carries weight, responsibility, layers you haven't even imagined yet. And the you who stands here today is still in the process of being refined, still releasing old fears, still learning how to protect your peace, still discovering who you are without noise, without need, without attachment. You may feel strong now, but the blessing you're asking for requires not just strength, but stillness, not just discipline, but depth, not just healing, but transformation. You're not waiting for the blessing. The blessing is waiting for you to catch up to who you're meant to be. And that version of you, the one who no longer begs for validation, no longer fears loneliness, no longer tries to prove themselves to people who were never listening. That version will not just receive the blessing, they will protect it. They will multiply it. They will walk with it, not as someone desperate to keep it, but as someone who finally understands its weight. But right now, you're still becoming, still unlearning, still letting go of emotional reflexes you built during survival, still learning how to trust Allah when He delays, and still trust Him when He delivers. You're still learning how to be alone without falling apart, still learning how to speak gently even when hurt, still learning how to say no without guilt, still learning how to accept no without bitterness, still learning how to hold peace in your heart, even when nothing outside you is peaceful. And Allah, He sees that journey, He sees that transformation, and He knows exactly which part of your soul needs to mature just a little more before the arrival becomes safe. Because some blessings, if given too early, can break you. They can turn your heart arrogant, or dependent, or exhausted, or addicted to something that was supposed to lift you closer to Allah, not replace Him. So He delays it. He freezes it, not as punishment, but as divine precision. Because when the version of you that you're destined to become finally steps into the space Allah prepared, everything will unlock at once, and you'll look back and realize you weren't waiting for the blessing. The blessing was waiting for you. The version of you who speaks with wisdom instead of reaction. The version who prays not just with words, but with deep, raw presence. The version who no longer self-destructs when things go silent. The version who smiles at Allah's timeline, even when confused. That version, she's being born in this freeze. He's being carved in this delay. Not in public, not in noise, but in sacred, divine stillness. So don't curse the freeze. Don't beg for the door to open before your heart is fully ready to walk through it. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are still becoming. And when that version of you finally arrives, so will everything else. All at once, without resistance, without confusion, without loss. Because Allah never delivers a blessing to a heart that's not yet trained to honor it. So tonight, if you're wondering why it's all frozen, remember this. It's not the blessing that's behind. It's the next you, being built silently, carefully, lovingly, by the one who never delays without divine reason. So if your life feels like it's standing still right now, if everything was finally making sense, only to be frozen in silence. I want you to breathe. Not everything stuck is broken. Not every pause means rejection. Sometimes Allah holds you back, not to punish you, but to protect the part of you that's still becoming. Because the version of you who will carry that dream, the one who won't shrink under pressure, who won't hand it to the wrong people, who won't let it replace your connection with Allah, is still being born. And when that version of you is ready, everything that feels frozen now will melt into motion, without you forcing a single thing. So don't rush this winter. Don't beg for the door to open early, because when Allah finally says, now, you won't just bloom, you'll never wilt again. What looks like a freeze was really Allah planting something eternal in silence.